I can almost guarantee not many people, including locals, know much about flora native to Greater Brisbane. It is understandable, however, as the abundance of introduced species can overshadow that which is native. The little known reality is that Greater Brisbane is full of flora unique in both appearance and functionality. You've likely walked past native plants without realizing, in the bush or along a suburban street, perhaps even in someone's garden or backyard. There are also native Brisbane plants in dire need of awareness and support, either because they occur rarely or are tragically vulnerable or facing extinction. Let's take a look.
Firstly, it is essential to understand the vital role native flora plays in Brisbane's natural ecosystems.
Well, plants in general are very important, obviously, because they are the link between transferring energy from the sun to plants, to ecosystems. Without plants, in general, we're not going to have any of that energy that we need transferred to all the other parts of the ecosystem. In terms of endemic species, obviously over time we've got a lot of our animals that have actually become evolved to using these plants in a variety of ways. And some of those ways are so specific that if you lose one plant, you potentially lose a number of insects or a number of other animals along the way. So if you lose one species, you are going to potentially lose a whole lot more along the way as well. But every now and then you've got these rare species that, or not even rare species, you've got a lot of species that rely on certain diets. So if you lose this plant and you lose the invertebrates that actually rely on that plant, you're going to start to have a cascade effect all the way through the various food chains, native food chains, where you will start to lose animals slowly over time.
Brisbane is home to some generalist animal species that are highly adaptable. They can utilise native and a variety of exotic or introduced flora for their diet and habitat. In particular, most common birds thrive in suburban areas, as they aren't super fussy about species of plants as long as they attract bugs. However, the sad reality is that not all native animals are as adaptable, and thus there can be ramifications for those that almost exclusively rely on native flora.
It's important to protect these plants because they contribute positively to human flourishing and to a healthy and resilient ecosystem, and that benefits humans. But it's particularly important for people to be aware of this stuff because ultimately we're the ones that are controlling what happens in this landscape.
Interestingly, native flora can also provide an array of economic benefits to society.
Restoring and protecting native ecosystems does yield a lot of other economic benefits in terms of tourism and promoting a sort of strong character and culture for this region. Like if you go to a city or you go to a region, you want to see something that's unique to that region, and our flora and fauna are really unique to southeast Queensland. So for that reason, there's a lot of tourism benefits as well to protecting them. And there can also be secondary economic benefits in terms of things like resisting erosion, cleaning the air, all that sort of stuff. But when it comes down to it, whether these things are making us money or not, we should still be protecting them.
Native flora is not only vital to natural ecosystems and beneficial to the economy, but it also has significant value to indigenous cultures, playing a big part in how their ancestors survived for thousands of years.
There's a lot of plants that relate to our culture, you know. We use plants in our culture for survival, you know, for medicine, for food, you know. The plants are part of the land, and our connection to the land is very important in our culture because that's our spirit. The land is our mother, you know, she gives us everything. All the trees, the animals, we're all related to those animals, trees, spiritually. So that's where our culture comes from. Our culture comes from the land. Our spirit comes from the land. So when we lose trees and, you know, wildlife, that's a part of our culture being lost.
I am aware that for tens of thousands of years, Indigenous people have been using a really wide range of native plants for food, for medicine, for construction, for making all sorts of stuff. And by erasing those plants from the ecosystem, we're essentially suppressing a part of that culture. And so there's a lot of literature out there arguing that by destroying certain species or making them really rare and endangered, you're also destroying the human cultures that are connected to those species. And I think that's definitely something that's happened in, say, around southeast Queensland, or in fact around most Australian cities, is that even if someone from a First Nations group wanted to practice traditional elements of their culture, they wouldn't be able to anymore because the plants or the animals that are connected to that cultural practice are no longer present in abundance.
There are growing concerns that the loss of native flora will greatly impact future generations of Indigenous peoples.
It is a worry for us that that part of our culture would be lost. You know, that plant is a very special part of our culture about our ancestors. You know, it's ancient. You know, and like we say, when it's gone, it's gone. We can't get that back. We do fear for the future that some of these things will disappear, and those knowledge of that certain plant or that certain species can't be passed on to the next generation. You know, it may not be our generation or the next generation, but what about the next generation after that, or the next generation after that? They're the ones who will be losing from this particular species becoming extinct. You know, they're the ones who are going to feel the impact of it.
We know that native flora is essential in many ways, so what is being done to support it? An ongoing initiative greatly supporting and promoting Brisbane's native flora is the Brisbane City Council's Free Native Plants program. The program offers a range of native plants suited to Brisbane's soil and subtropical climate, including ground covers, tufting plants, climbers, small and medium shrubs, and shade and feature trees. Eligible Brisbane residents in targeted suburbs can claim 2 free native plants each financial year, and those moving into newly built homes can claim 4 to help establish their gardens. Schools, community groups, clubs, body corporates, and official citizenship ceremonies can claim even more.
The Brisbane City Council Free Tree program is a way that we can engage with the local community to make sure that we can support them to plant some local native Indigenous plants.
The program has proven wildly successful, with thousands of people from diverse backgrounds claiming free native plants every year. It not only helps support local nurseries, but it also encourages people to think differently about what they plant in gardens.
We get a lot of migrants come in, which is really good to see, you know, learning some of the local native plants. A lot of retirees will come in and take advantage of it. We do see some younger people come in as well.
I think often the fact that you're getting a couple of free native plants from council can be a starting point for people to do bigger gardening projects. And so, although it's only like 2 plants a year, it actually leads to people being more engaged with gardening and conservation more generally.
The Brisbane City Council is also pushing to replant more native plant species after infrastructure developments. Some native plants that were once vulnerable or endangered are now mass-produced and planted in these areas.
So obviously there's a lot of development and various different clearings going on around the place, and Brisbane City Council is very passionate about making sure that they repopulate the local areas with local Indigenous plants. So obviously they have mechanisms to make sure that the native plants get put back into new estates.
Also associated with the Brisbane City Council's Free Native Plants program, the not-for-profit and community-run organisation Patton Park Nursery is promoting native plants around southeast Queensland. They've created a publicly accessible native plants database on their website. It goes as far as categorising which native plants are native to what suburbs. So, what's threatening Brisbane's native flora? Invasive and introduced plant species, climate change, and man-made threats such as pollution and habitat destruction are actively endangering Brisbane's native flora. In particular, government infrastructure projects which involve land clearing don't always replant suitable flora for the original inhabitants or surrounding ecosystems.
The worst thing that we see is when we see those government organisations take out the native flora, build in their infrastructure and put a whole lot of exotic species around it. So anything that was living there, anything that was utilising that source of food or habitat can't live there anymore. And again, you get those generalists. So it's a really important thing for governments or any organisation to think about the endemic species that live there. We also have that habit of actually not only putting in plants that are not native, and we talk about native, but we need to be talking about endemically native. So what was here? So I can bring a tree down from North Queensland and we can say it's native, but nothing here will use it.
It is vital to understand the difference between native and endemic flora. Native flora, or indigenous flora, is an encompassing term for plant species naturally originating or occurring in typically broader regions without human intervention or influence. Similarly, but more specifically, endemic flora is a term for native plant species occurring in and restricted to typically narrower areas with a particular or even sometimes unique niche. Endemic flora adapts to ecosystems with things such as rare or specific climate or even types of soil. Their specialization and inability to relocate puts them at greater risk of becoming vulnerable or extinct from various threats.
Lesser known is the potential harm the Brisbane City Council's good intended restoration efforts for native plants can have on endemic flora and their unique ecosystems. Mass producing and repopulating only easy to maintain native plants risks overshadowing and even endangering other endemic species.
If you do a general plant list, you will get a bunch of fauna living there as well. No different to what we have in the burbs right now. So, and a lot of people, the big myth is, will removing all our endemic plants make the ecosystem completely collapse? It won't. It will just create a nice generic ecosystem. It'll create what we could now call our urban ecosystem. So we will still have Australian fauna and we will still have Australian flora. It's just it'll be the same everywhere.
Native plants are incredibly important to, I guess, a healthy ecosystem and a healthy environment more generally, and people need a healthy environment to survive and thrive. We don't want to live in a world that's just all concrete and steel, or a kind of denuded landscape that only has like 2 or 3 of the same species over and over again. And unfortunately, that's what we're starting to see in a lot of both private properties and public parks and stuff, is that council and private businesses tend to prioritise plants and tree species that are easy to maintain, that don't need a lot of water, etc. And so we're kind of getting a bit more of a monoculture, where historically this part of southeast Queensland was a really diverse bioregion with a really broad range of different trees and bushes and understories and vines and creepers and all that sort of stuff. But now the kind of palette of different plants that are getting planted in people's backyards or that are getting planted in council gardens is really reduced. The plants we're choosing to plant and the plants we're not choosing to plant are creating kind of these gaps in the ecosystem where you've got a lot of this kind of animal and a lot of this kind of species, but then none of this. And that means that it's not a resilient or rich enough ecosystem, and that makes it more prone to collapse or disruption.
It is important to note the misconception that only plants from outside Australia can get classified as introduced or invasive species. Native plants introduced to other native ecosystems they aren't endemic to have the potential to become invasive, spreading and causing damage to biodiversity. A native plant that plays a vital role in one native ecosystem could become a weed if introduced to another if fewer biological restraints are present. The ecosystem can then either learn to rely on the weed for certain functions or risk going out of balance.
So, what improvements can be made to support Brisbane's native flora? Although virtuous in making great progress, places and programs proactively supporting native flora have room for improvement. Greater awareness and education to the general public is essential.
So walking around a place like this and knowing the vegetation means that if you have to restore it, you know what plants you need to bring back in. So that's really important, is making sure you know that the links between your flora and fauna in a location, particular location, is very, very important. You cannot just plant anything. You want the local fauna to survive, the endemic fauna to survive, you have to plant the local or endemic plants. They're very tightly connected. we don't value our vegetation enough. We don't value our natives enough, and we don't value the fact that there are plants that are really, really sensitive to everything we do. And they're vitally important to something that we just don't know about. So often you'll hear people say, well, you know, that plant there, how important is it? And I'll often say, and I know a bit about the plants here, I'll just say, I don't know, but it's something relies on that. It's not, we don't need to prove what everything is, how everything's connected. You just need to know things are connected to that plant species.
Programs supporting native flora need to be more inclusive of Indigenous voices.
I think that we do need to make these certain things aware to the wider community and let them know that when these things are gone, they're gone and we can't get them back. Generations are going to miss out on things that we have here today that, you know, that are still with us. And if the awareness isn't there and promotion of campaigns to save certain species, then it's going to be lost to us.
There also needs to be more consideration of how much we humans take from nature.
I think a lot of us as Brisbaneites need to think more critically about how we live and where we want to live and how much space we need, whether we're talking about like apartments in the inner city or like homes out in the suburbs. How much space per person is it reasonable for us to take up, and how much space do we need to leave for nature?
Having spoken about Brisbane's native flora generally, it's time to run through some specific plant species of interest that you can even consider adopting into your gardens. Sometimes falsely accused of being a weed, the barbed wire vine is a spiky climber native to most environments across southeast Queensland, from rainforests to open eucalyptus forests.
The barbed wire vine is sure to make its presence known if you happen to brush past it wearing shorts. Its spikes, fitting to its name, provide the perfect habitat, protection and food in the form of round black fruits for various animal species such as small birds. It even grows fragrant flowers that attract a myriad of insects, especially butterflies. Its tough, leathery leaves act as the larval host for several butterfly species.
Native to the Brisbane region, grass trees are easily identifiable by their grass-like leaves that sprout from the top of the plant.
These unique, hardy trees thrive in nutrient-poor soils and live for up to 450 years. You wouldn't think it at first, but due to their incredibly slow growth rate of 1 centimetre per year, grass trees often get poached for their high financial value. This is detrimental not only to the trees themselves, but also to the ecosystems they support.
Native to Queensland and Brisbane, the soap tree is a large shade-producing tree with an overall greyish-green tone. It bears small greenish-white flowers in late autumn and early winter, followed by globular dark fruits. It grows in several environments, from eucalypt forests and rainforests to savannas and places with sandy soils.
As the name suggests, Indigenous people used it for soapy baths, as the crushed leaves contain saponin and create a lather when rubbed in water. The tree also serves as a food plant for various species of insects, especially butterflies.
Closely resembling and relating to the European raspberry, Australia is home to its own native raspberry, with a brighter colour and sweeter flavour. It is a rainforest fruit that happily grows alongside streams and shady creeks over a wide area of eastern Australia, from Victoria in the south to tropical North Queensland.
Although this plant is more common in northern Queensland, it does occur sporadically here in Brisbane at lower altitudes. Not only are they extremely tasty, but they are also very nutritious and are fast gaining a reputation as natural medicine. Some research even shows the berries have an extremely high antioxidant activity, which suggests that the berries have antibacterial properties.
Brisbane is home to some truly intriguing native plants, and we need to make more room for them. They do protect and form the unique ecosystems we live in, after all. We all call this beautiful region home, and to keep it beautiful, we humans need to learn how to better coincide with our native natural environments. So, what can you do to help? Whether you choose to plant some natives in your backyard or not, There are an array of steps you can take to support native plants in your everyday life. Making sure to stay on designated tracks, keeping dogs on leads, learning about plants endemic to our suburbs, or even supporting local council programs can all make a difference.
The harsh reality is there are many native plants that are already extinct or on the brink of extinction, and we don't even know it. Some of these vital native species are at risk of being lost forever, so we need to act now before it's too late. We can't afford to lose the plants that make Brisbane, well, Brisbane. There's not much the plants can do, but we certainly can make a difference.